Hi, this is Sam Welker with ThinkParticle.com, and in this video we're going to be talking about the TP Toolkit. This is the visual documentation series, and we have a new update of the TP Toolkit, and in this video we're going to be talking about the TP particle object. Now this particle object has been around since the beginning of the TP Toolkit, which by the way you can find at ThinkParticle.com, and it's an object that will allow you to emit particles from other particles. So to exemplify how that works, we're going to go ahead and drag it into the scene. And, or excuse me, not drag, we're going to drop it into the scene. And if you haven't learned how to do that already, go ahead and watch our first video and we'll explain how to do that. And then we need our thinking particle settings so we can set them up. So in this case, we're going to emit from some simple particles from a simple emitter. We're going to set that value lower though. So we're going to emit 15 particles per second, and each of those particles is going to emit 150 particles per second. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and set up our thinking particle groups. Now I'm going to show you what happens if you don't. You're going to emit and it's going to go really slow. We've already capped out at our max particles because the thinking particle or the TP particle object emits particles from itself then. It will emit from the all group, and it can't do that. If you do, you will emit from each particle, and it will get in this endless loop until it hits the maximum amount of particles allowed in a scene. So that will crash your scene. So go ahead and set up your particle groups. So our first one is the parent particle group. So we need to set that up by taking the particle group we're going to emit from. In this case, it's the TP Toolkit particle group. It's a parent particle. And then it's going to emit auxiliary particles or children particles, kind of like how particular works in After Effects. So now that we've got that set up, we're emitting into the all group. But we are going to want to set that up with our own particle group, the TP particle group, like that. There you go. Now the particles are emitting with some velocity, so we're going to go ahead and just turn that off for now. So now we have particles emitting per frame as these particles move out. Okay, so we have our parent group and our particle group set, and we'll talk about Mograph at the end. If you haven't seen our Mograph or TP Mograph video yet, go ahead and check that out to learn more about how it works. We'll just briefly brush over it here. And we won't give any visual examples in this case because we don't need to, we already did. So the next is how many particles do you emit per second? So in this case, we're going to emit 30 particles per second. So that's one particle per frame. Okay. What if we set it to, oops, that's life. What if we set it to 60 particles per frame? Then it will calculate in between that motion and add a particle in between, or say adding 120 particles per frame. And that's the technique that we're using there is called subframe sampling, and thinking particles don't have that. And it is a downside to thinking particles, but we can cheat it and it will calculate in between. So we kind of do. So we have subframe sampling, so the particles are getting 4 particles emitted every frame in their proper positions. So we're going to keep that at 30 particles per second per particle. So we're going to make sure we cover the overparent age. We're going to do that at the end. So if you've seen our other emitters, go ahead and skip to the end. Nothing is different in these, minus this one small portion in velocity, which I'll cover right now. The particles can have their own velocity, and we'll set the x FOV and the y FOV to 360, and set the velocity to 15 to give a good example of this. So these particles are now traveling, and they have their little tails, or trails, I guess, of particles. We're going to set the life a little lower. Okay. So we have our velocity, and then we also have an inherent velocity. So these are going to emit and follow along that particle, that parent particle. It will take the parent particle's velocity, and that's something that you can effectively control over the age of a particle. But we'll talk about how to do that in a bit. So we have our speed set to 15 with inherit velocity off to give us these nice trails. So the particles that are coming out, these orange particles, have a lifespan of 30 frames and a life variation of 0. We'll set that to 100, so they will have a lifespan between 0 and 30 frames per particle, randomly adjusted and selected. And then we have a speed of 15 per particle. We're going to set that to 30. And then that will have a variation of 100 is what we're going to change it to, and that will give us this kind of effect of these trails coming off, a random trail per particle. Then we have our direction variation, and these actually move along the particle, or along the z-axis. So in this case, you're going to want to add a little bit of variation to these. You can control that by adding a TP alignment object, which we'll talk about later in this series, to your TP Toolkit group, and then that should inherit that. So there you go. So go ahead and ask questions in the comments below if that doesn't make sense after you've watched both videos. Next, Mograph. So Mograph allows you to use Mograph effectors, and in Espresso we have the ability to sample those and use that sample, like the volume on a sound or a specific pixel on an image or shader effector. These sort of things in the Mograph menu. We can use any of these, the coffee effector, the random effector, the target effector. Basically all of these can have, including the plane effector, the group effector, these can all have their value, their strength that's put out between -1 and 1 sampled. Some of these will have a value between 0 and 1, and you can sample these values and apply that and multiply that value to the particles per second, the life, the speed, and the FOV values. And these sliders right here, once you've got say a random effector, we'll use. Let's go ahead and use a noise and then 20. Okay, we can go ahead and drag that Mograph effector in. There we go. And we're going to adjust the values. So between 0 and 100 in this case for emitting particles. And that will give us randomized lifespans and variation on position and speed, and that's using Mograph to control these values that otherwise would just have their own values set here. So that gives you that extra level of control. And adding the ability to emit a particle and then it will explode, and that particle explosion can be controlled by a sound. The speed can be controlled by a sound, or thunder or lightning, things like that can control these things, or beeps. A beeping sound can trigger these things really however you'd like. You can do audio visualization like VJ work with music. That's a really powerful feature and it's really fun to do. You can create some really awesome visuals. Kind of like Matthias Muller's videos. You can find them on YouTube. He has these really cool Krakatoa experiments made with thinking particles in 3ds Max, and this is basically using sound and those sort of settings to control them, to control thinking particles in a similar way. Last we're going to talk about is overparent age. So the particles are going to emit 30 particles per second, but we're going to take this value right here, and we're going to basically, let's go ahead and look at these particles right here. The parent particles, we're going to only emit for 30 seconds and have 200 frames, or 200 sets the speed. So here are the particles, and each particle has a lifespan. So we're going to say at the beginning of that particle's life, don't emit anything, and at the end, emit 30 frames, the whole lot, the whole set. Okay, so at the beginning, they're not going to emit any, and at the end, they're going to emit a ton. So let's go ahead and make these point types easy ease to kind of give you a better understanding. So at the end, these particles are going to emit a lot, and at the beginning, they're not. So that's how that works. And again, they're using the random effector controls things was causing them to move, it will push the values above where they are. So it will multiply them and add to them. So if it's 5, if the speed's set to 5 and you add the random effector, that might go as far as 10 or 15. It could go much higher depending on how you've set your settings in Mograph. So that is how the overage setting works. And again, we're going to show some more settings like the life controlled overage and the speed. Let's set it to smaller numbers at the beginning. Actually, in this case, we'll flip this one. Okay, we'll have the particles emit with high speeds at the beginning and then go down. So at the beginning, when a particle is emitted, say right over here, it's going to have a really big speed, and then it's going to get to the end of its life and it's going to move at 0. And then again, the X FOV and the Y FOV. We can go ahead and just control those. And we can just set those to 0. So at the end, they again don't emit out. So that's how the overparent age. So that's basically taking the age of the parent particle and multiplying with this spline curve these values that we already have, and then taking it down to 0 where we tell it to, which gives us this added level of control. So in this video, we talked about enabling and disabling our emitter. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we're not emitting particles from our particles. Now we are. We enable and disable Mograph integration with a random effector. We have our emitter, our particle group, excuse me, to control these particles and visualize them. In this case, make them orange. Then we have our new, our parent particle group, excuse me, which takes the TP simple emitter particles from the TP toolkit. We have our particles per second, and then we have the amount of effect they have from Mograph. We also have the overparent age curve applied to cause them to emit more towards the end of the parent's life. We have our start emission and our end emission. We have our lifespan. We have our Mograph affected multiplier. We have our life variation, again, parent age. We have the ability to inherit velocity, and we have our speed, our Mograph integration again, speed variation, parent age, the FOV values, the Mograph integration, and the parent age. So that is what we talked about in this video. So thank you very much for watching. This is the TP particle object. We're going to go ahead and keep making more of these videos and explaining how the TP toolkit works. We're really excited for this new release and hope that it'll be really great for you guys. We believe, as we develop this, that this is a great tool for artists to really dive into more advanced thinking particles on a great budget. It's very affordable, and you can find the TP toolkit at thinkparticle.com, and for under $50, you can get a fantastic particle toolkit that gives you a lot of power and control to get into dynamics. And this is a great way also to get started with thinking particles when you want to expand your knowledge there. And you can find the rest of the series again on thinkparticle.com. And lastly, I'm Sam Welker, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.